Hello, everybody. My name is John McAuliffe, and I'm an associate publisher here at Carcanet, and I'm really happy this beautiful spring evening in Manchester to welcome you to tonight's launch of Victoria Kennefick's first book, Eat or We Both Starve. And what a beautiful production it is as well. Our host tonight is our brilliant friend, the poet Martina Evans. Martina is, like Victoria, originally from Cork, but a long-time London resident. She is a poetry critic at the Irish Times, where her voice is as welcome and inimitable as in her brilliant poems. And I'm really delighted that she's agreed to host tonight's launch. We would like it very much if you could use the chat function, which you can find at the bottom of the screen. I'm sure many of you are already aware of how that works, but the link for buying the book, and you get a discount on buying the book, is in the chat already, and we'll post it again there at the end of the night. But we'd also love it if you could just pop where you're watching us from tonight. It's lovely to get a sense of who's here and where you are as you're watching the poems being read. And you will, of course, as usual, be able to read the poems as well as hear Victoria read them and to hear her conversation with Martina. So I'm going to hand over to Martina now, and I'm really looking forward to this.
So I'm really thrilled to be here this evening. Victoria is such an exciting voice, wonderful poet and person. So I feel actually really privileged. But I'm going to do her serious bio first. Victoria Kennefick is a poet, writer and teacher from Shanagarry, County Cork, and now she's based in Kerry. Her first collection, Eat or We Both Starve, is published today, and White Whale from Southward Editions 2015 won the Munster Literature Centre Food for Poetry chapbook competition and the Saboteur Award for Best Poetry Pamphlet. Her work has appeared in Poetry, the Poetry Review, PN Review, Poetry Ireland Review, The Stinging Fly, Poetry News, Prelude, Copper Nickel, the Irish Times, Ambit and Bathmac. She won the 2013 Red Line Book Festival Poetry Prize, and many of her poems have been anthologized and broadcast on national radio stations. She is also a recipient of the Next Generation Artist Award from the Arts Council of Ireland, and she has received bursaries from Kerry County Council and Words Ireland. She's also, you probably know her as the co-host of the Unlaunched Books podcast, and she's on the committee for the Listowel Writers' Week. She also holds a doctorate in English from University College Cork and studied at Emory University and Georgia College and State University as part of a Fulbright scholarship. So she's an incredibly exciting, intelligent poet, but she's also, I think, she's got something extra. But I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience of reading her poems over the last few weeks. I've been watching this incredibly active squirrel in my garden while reading Victoria's poems. And this squirrel dangles off the olive tree upside down, munches a geranium leaf, digs up eggs, which he's prepared earlier, puts two tiny paws around a bucket of cashew nut ice cream and drinks deeply. She flies through the air like Victoria in her swing poem. And the two of them have become conflated in my mind over the last few weeks. Victoria's poems are feather-light on their feet. The words race and dart around the pages in intricate loops. She's incredibly agile and not ashamed in all her consumings. She somehow manages to be charming and funny while digging deep and getting seriously dirty in all that earth. And she makes us laugh. Her subjects are the body, especially the overused, over-ogled, abused female body, and sacrifice and ritual. These poems strip right back to the basics of what we are and how we work. The poetry is timeless and modern, reminiscent of the intense wit of her mentors, Plath and Dickinson. But I don't think anyone has opened more doors or tapped on so many walls of the human body. Eat or We Both Starve reminds me of the Lestrygonians episode of Joyce's Ulysses, which is so full of poetry and consumings in the middle of the day, Dublin, 1904. Yet he almost seems heavy beside her now. If all art aspires to the condition of music, and Joyce's prose certainly does, Victoria's words are literally dancing. And that takes us right back to the source of poetry, the ritual dance which accompanied the breath. You can literally hear these words breathing off the page, like Sappho's, mere words, but delicious to hear. And perhaps it's the spirit of Sappho who comes closest to what's happening in Eat or We Both Starve. I'm thinking of that famous line from Sappho's fragment number 13. Oh, it puts the heart in my chest on wings. But for all the dancing, the leaps and the multiplicity here, there's a real sense of unity. Every poem in the book is connected. Each one makes sense on its own, but is in conversation with the whole. The stunning opening poem acts like an index for this dramatic book. True drama is something which can be acted out. I think almost every line of this book could be acted out on stage, especially the first poem, Learning to Eat My Mother, which is like a very vivid mime, disgusting and delicious. Obviously, Victoria is not literally eating her mother. The book is in fact dedicated to Victoria's mum, Una Kennefick, and there's a very strong sense of her nurturing presence throughout the book, a very strong sense of a loving, connected family. And I think it's this love that balances the darkness and makes these poems really fly. It's really difficult to make poems out of issues, and this is a political book in many ways. One needs as much light as dark, along with talent and craft. A lot of work and thought lie underneath these flying poems, and I look forward to hearing Victoria telling us more about this after she's read the first two poems in the book.
Hello, everyone. I am overwhelmed by that amazing introduction, Martina. Thank you so much for that and for all of the help and guidance that you've given to me all through my writing career, but especially in the last couple of weeks. And John, isn't this so exciting? It's so wonderful to finally be here. And thanks to you so much for making it all happen, and to Jazz for being the brains behind all of this. I'm very grateful. And I'm so grateful to all of you for tuning in. I can't see you, but I can see your names and your chat pop. So it's really lovely that you're here, and I feel it. I feel it. So thank you so much. I'm going to start with the poem that Martina mentioned, Learning to Eat My Mother, where my mother is the teacher. Where did I start? Yes, with the heart. Enlarged, its chambers stretched through caring. In this body, feeling is what the body is. The alert art, an alarm rings out in all hours of the night, flashing red and white. Oh, is it in defiance or defeat? I don't know. I eat it anyway, raw, still warm, the size of my fist. I love it. Strange, a vegetarian resorting to cannibalism. She is disgusted with me. Wouldn't you begin with the outside? Sweating, I pry open the rib cage. I do not want to eat her ribs, but I do. Then strip her fingers of meat. I hold them tenderly in my mouth. Watch her blue eyes well up out of love, I assume. I move from heart to ribs, fingers to spongy lungs, buoyant, porous, melt in the mouth. The eyes are tougher than expected. Aqueous humor slithers down my throat. A surprise, it's minty. I know what you're thinking. I left the brain. No, not so. I have consumed that organ piecemeal, sweet morsels since my teeth came in. It tastes like the sound of sirens you don't know are screaming until they suddenly stop. And that poem, I spoke a little bit about it last night on Arena, and Kay mentioned how shocking it was. And I suppose I'd never really considered how shocking it was before, really, even though I know subconsciously it is, and consciously indeed that it is. But I think it's very much setting up, as Martina says, the rest of the book in terms of the ritualistic nature of some of the themes that the poems deal with. This next poem, Meat, is, I suppose, my vegetarian origin story, if you like. I've been asked so many times about why I became a vegetarian and when I became a vegetarian. And I became a vegetarian when I was about 5 or 6. 6, I suppose, 6 going on 7 maybe. And when I was researching the saints, which we'll talk about a little bit later, so many of them started their journey towards sainthood when they were 6 or 7. Now, I'm not saying that I'm a saint by any stretch, but there's something about that age, I think, where there's a growing awareness of the body, and the body that you're living in is going to change and so on. So this is, I suppose, how I became a vegetarian and why. Meat. I sucked marrow from bones at dinner, my father's face a bloody grin of pride. I ate liver in chunks for breakfast, pink and firm, jewels to adorn my insides. I gloried in the feel of flesh, the exertion of the chew. Holding my mother's hand in the English market, I saw them, turkey chandeliers, plucked, bruised purple eyelids, dainty light bulbs. Their smell fresh as the insides of my mouth. Mother stroked my hair. There. I refused to eat meat, became pillowy, meek. She hid muscle under mashed potato. I tasted its tang in soup. Eat up, my parents said. I could not swallow. My skin goose pimple yellow, doctors drew blood in tiny, regular sips. Teeth turned to glass and shattered in my mouth. All I could taste was blood. So that's where it all came from, seeing the turkeys hanging upside down in the English market.
There was something about a lamb as well, wasn't there?
Yes, there was. My granny Kennefick, I loved her very much, and she dressed in widow's garb the entire time I knew her. And I was sitting on her lap one day looking at the lambs gambolling in the field next to our house, and they were so joyful and jumping and springing, and I was delighted. And she kind of squeezed me and said, oh, soon they'll be on our table. And I was like, what? It's a moment that it's like a kind of villain origin story that the innocence, like the scales fell from my eyes, and I realized that everything that I had been told about, certainly about consumption, was cloaked in secrecy, or maybe, I don't know, denial or just practicality, but that lamb was lamb and chicken was chicken and beef was beef. And it just became really important to me very early on to stop eating.
Because when I went back to Lestragonian's Blood of the Lamb comes on early, and he talks about consuming all the time. You're the only other person I know that is engaged, so strongly and so effectively in this way. But he did Blood of the Lamb, which of course is about sacrifice, isn't it? And I think these poems are very interesting as well when you see them later on in the book, how you think about sacrifice as regards the Catholic religion and how that impacts on you. For instance, when you go up to receive communion and that's his blood, that's his
very
so
much.
How do you
Sorry. Well, I think that is so true, and I didn't really, I suppose, intentionally at the beginning think about that notion of sacrifice until I was kind of much deeper into the book. And I think so much of my subconscious and my internal world has been shaped by the language of the Catholic Church. And for all of its, you know, we won't go there, but for all of the other things going on with it, the language when you were a child going to Mass every Sunday or going to benediction or going to the Stations of the Cross, like it's an extraordinary ritual to be exposed to from a very, very young age. And, you know, to be exposed to these concepts of sacrifice and self-denial and this, you know, drinking of literal blood, you know, not symbolic, literal. And these washing of the dishes, as I was fascinated with when I was a child. I couldn't believe the priest was washing the dishes. So I think there is definitely, you know, undeniably and inescapably for me, this connection between food, the church, you know, that consumption of blood and flesh, and then the notion of sacrifice, and then sexuality, I think, ultimately. Oh no, you haven't frozen, have you?
Exactly. I mean, because one of the things about the poem, have I frozen?
No, you're back. I think there's just a delay.
Can you hear me? One of the things what I really loved about this first poem, I said it was like a mime. I also felt that there was a real strong understanding of how the body works behind it. And I wondered, do you see images of, I think of biology books and skeletons and things like that when I read your books? Do you have a strong sense of the physical sense of the body? Do you remember it from school? Or
I remember the visceral nature of the body from school. I remember very distinctly, I think I took music, I can't remember what economics. I chose economics for my leaving cert, and within about 3 days, I put up my hand and I was like, I just don't know what language you're speaking. I have to move on. So I went to do biology, and we had a fabulous teacher in my school, and she had us do a lot of experiments and a lot of dissections. And I'll never forget dissecting a cow's eye. And we had very blunt old instruments. And even though I was a vegetarian, and I wasn't entirely delighted to be, you know, dissecting the eye, I felt on another level that at least the eye wasn't being wasted. At least we were learning from it. And I remember trying to cut it open, and I couldn't because of the blunt instrument, and the aqueous humor spurted all over me. And it was just horrific, but also so exhilarating. And I think when I was thinking of the aqueous humor in that poem, it really does come back to those biology lessons and actually confronting the fleshiness and, as you said, like disgusting grossness of the body, and how I'm so interested in that because I have a body, but also horrified and alienated by it in the poems, because I want in the poems certainly to control that aspect of myself, and the speakers want that to control, which, you know, those two things don't really go together very well.
No, but I think most humans try, and you know, it's all about beginning out of control of your body as a child and all the rest of it, and how far you go. But what I think is great here is that cow's eye was definitely not wasted, because I think that cow's eye is in this poem, isn't it? And
Definitely.
I think that's very strong. I have a very strong feeling of that physical body. It makes me think of artists who do lots and lots of sketches, because I feel these poems there's a lot underneath, a lot of thought and a lot of thinking, and that's why they're so real on the page. But we've a lot of poems to read, so I think we should move on to number 3 on our list, which is Researching the Irish Famine.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So this poem, I suppose it came from reading a lot around the famine, and I'm a teacher as well in secondary school, and one of the first major events that we look at in history is the famine, and it's the one that usually the students who would be in second year, you know, around 14 maybe, it's one that they're familiar with. And when I was growing up, it was so relevant to everything we did. I remember being aware of it so early and reading Marita Connan McKenna's books all about the famine, which were so extraordinary, Wildflower Girl and so on. And Sinead O'Connor's amazing song Famine, which was brought out in 1995 to great controversy, and I was blown away by that when I was growing up. And because she really talked about that sense of disconnect and loss of identity. And for me, I suppose in the book and throughout the poems, there is a connection between what is lost in terms of how we consume. You know, there are rituals around it. And certainly this devastating event massively, as we all know, impacted on our cultural, our societal, our identity, all of those elements of being Irish, or whatever that means now. Researching the Irish famine. Bulldozers disturb the old workhouse site, uncover baby skulls curved like tiny moons, their mothers beside them, lullabies locked in their jaws. They can measure hunger now, test how much bellies rumbled, the stress teeth were under, rotten before they broke scurvied gums. Mothers exhausted their own bodies to produce milk. High nitrogen, evidence of body tissue breaking down, recycling. The starving human literally consumes itself. Babies died anyway. They all died, wasted away like potatoes in the ground. The whole country rotten. What was left, buried in memorial gardens, alongside statues to honor hunger. Children with milky fat, teeth in braces. All we do now is eat.
So I love that last line. And I love the nature of how this is laid out on the page as well, because it kind of makes me think of somebody digging in the soil, because each verse is like a fragment. So, and those babies' skulls curved like tiny moons. It's so beautiful. But so one of the things we were talking about earlier, Victoria, was it takes a lot of bravery to come right up to the human body like that and look into it, because I think all cultures have their ways of, you know, shutting off different aspects of it. And you didn't all the time write poetry like this. You definitely had a breakthrough. And do you want to say something about how that happened?
Yes. Well, I was very lucky. Around after the pamphlet came out around 2015, I went to Sarah Lawrence College in New York to a summer school there. I got a scholarship to go there. And I was working with the American poet Gregory Pardlo. And he had just won the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry that year for his brilliant collection, Digest. Interesting title. So I went there. I was afraid going there, you know, wondering, I hadn't really had much experience of reading my poetry in an academic, or working on my poetry in an American academic space. I had worked in an American academic space previously, but with the safety of academia and all that entails to kind of protect me. But it was the most extraordinary week. And I think he's an extraordinary teacher and a very, very insightful person. And I remember he took us for one-on-ones. So we had a class during the afternoon or during the morning together. And then in the afternoon, we would meet with him. And he was so incredibly generous with his time and so intensely direct, like nothing I had experienced before, in terms of asking me questions about why I wrote and what I was interested in writing about. And I had been aware of the way that I speak, and I think this might be an Irish thing, and maybe even Martina, I don't know if you feel this a Cork thing, that I had been speaking in spirals. And so dancing and moving around what it was that I was supposed to be engaging with, and assuming and hoping that the people I was speaking to would do the work for me and understand what I meant. But that in America, whatever about Ireland, people, you know, are used to the little bit of a dance, and sometimes that's part of the joy of conversing. But in America, in my experience, they're like, look, what is your bottom line here? Get to the point. And so in terms of poetry, that's what he ultimately made me do, in the most gentle and incredibly, you know, he was very, it was a very safe space. We had built up a lot of trust in the group and a lot of trust with him. And he just basically allowed me to be brave, I think, and to be truthful, and to be, as you say, to excavate and to, you know, get dirty and to bring it up. And because what else is the point if you're not going to actually say it out? And I think America gave me that very much, even that time. I think spending time there when I was studying, but also spending time there with American poets, it just allowed me a different perspective and a certain freedom, and allowing my personality, I suppose, to be the poems as well, because I think I was trying very hard to be more serious or be more lyrical, or I don't know, whatever I thought I should be. He just really encouraged me to move beyond that. And Terence Hayes was also there, and Diane Seuss as well. So it was an incredible, life-changing week in terms of poetry. And that's where I wrote Cork Schoolgirl, actually. And that's the first poem that really deals with the mouth and the licking and all of that. And that was a real breakthrough poem, I think, because it allowed me to find my way in to what I was interested in.
Yes, because I heard you read it at the Poetry Cafe. How long ago now? 18 months? Something like that. And it
before all of this horror.
Long before it all happened. And I was just blown away. So you read it for us now. It's, yeah.
I'd love to. Cork Schoolgirl considers the GPO Dublin 2016. I am standing outside the GPO in my school uniform, which isn't ideal. My uniform is the colour of bull's blood. In this year, I am 16, a pleasing symmetry because I love history. Have I told you that? It is mine, so I carry it in my rucksack. I love all the men of history, sacrificing themselves for Ireland, for me, these rebel Jesuses. I put my finger in the building's bullet holes, poke around in its wounds. I wonder if they feel it, those boys. I hope they do, their blooming faces pressed flat in the pages of my books. I lick the wall as if it were a stamp. It tastes of bones, this smelly city, of those boys in uniforms. Theirs bloody too. I put my lips to the pillar. I want to kiss them all. And I do. I kiss all those boys goodbye.
I had the message to unmute again. That must have been so much fun to write.
It was so long, Martina. It was so long. And I think that's something as well that I suppose that, you know, looking at feast and famine and excess and consumption, something that I learned to edit and cut down. So it was a riot to write. It actually was great fun and very liberating, I think, because it's kind of exciting to put yourself or the speaker as a young girl at the center, because I had enormous crushes on all of these, you know, 1916 figures, because we went to an all-girls school, and it was unfortunate because there was no boys' school nearby, as there usually is, a twin boys' school. So we were called in the next town over the Virgin Megastore, which is a terrible name, but we were very protected and isolated. So we all kind of developed crushes on, you know, people in our history books, because literally we didn't have really access, or I certainly didn't, to have any alternative at the time. So it was just, I think, you know, working with Gregory and working on this poem, it kind of allowed me to maybe insert myself in history, and also to reclaim it in some way, and make a stand. Because there's so much, like certainly when I was studying history, it's a little bit better now. There was no mention of women whatsoever. So it was just kind of that rebellious streak to insert myself.
Well, I love that. And it you know, there's a kind of a hinge when the poem just moves right in at that line. I put my finger in the building bullet holes and poke around in the wounds. I wonder if they like it, if they feel it. I love it, those boys. So yeah, I'm just looking, some of the poems you go for the 2-line, and I kind of imagine you're going down steps when you're writing. I don't know if you feel that, because I think it was interesting after I picked up on Lestrygonians, because I was thinking, oh, because you forget it's Ulysses as well, and the journey to the underworld, and I think that's part of your writing as well, isn't it? Your father's death was, and we've discussed this because my father's death started me writing. So yeah, so poetry kind of thrives, and I think poetry and death are connected. There's no question about it. And talking about death and poetry, I'm thinking of Sylvia Plath and the wonderful poem In Heptonstall. So you're going to read these two poems together now, In Heptonstall and Selfie.
In Heptonstall, and I'm going to dedicate this to Sylvia Plath, wherever she is. I find you, it's not a competition, sprouting tulips, a jar of pens. I lay 3 daffodils. My new husband kneels to take a photograph. We debate the portent of honeymoon snaps of dead poets' graves. In the picture, the wind messes with my hair, light makes me squint. On screen, I am already in the past. I apologize to your neighbor, step on his plot to get closer. My husband wisely wanders off. I talk aloud, resist the weird urge to lie on top of you, as if we'd share something else but soil. I don't think we'd have gotten on. I tell you about my wedding, the poems I write on train tickets, on receipts. This poem. I do cry, relieved where you're buried is wild and fierce, that there are red tulips licking your name in metal and stone, hungry. My husband returns, waving a tissue like a white flag. Thank you, David, for agreeing to honeymoon in the UK so that I could visit dead poets' graves. And Sylvia Plath was just one of many that we visited over the course of our honeymoon, which was the best holiday I've ever been on. It was just amazing. So thank you so much, David, for that. We did some other stuff too. We did lots of other exciting things, but there were a lot of poets. This next poem, Selfie, was just recently turned into a film by the very brilliant poet and filmmaker Luke Morgan, and starred Lucia Evans as the main character, and she recited this poem so exquisitely. And if you haven't checked it out, I would recommend that you do. It's online. Mountains to Sea screened it. She just did such a brilliant job that I am I will do my best, but she did a great job. Selfie. Sitting alone in the house, eating my fingernails, watching the sky move away. The room is full, versions of me crouching on the floor, balancing on the windowsill, reclining on the pout of my lower lip, asleep in the crease of my eyelid. Not alone, with myself, a snare I have been running from. I do not live the way humans are supposed to. Compare my face to others you know. I fall short, an embarrassing fringe. No matter what face I try on, it's exhausting. All versions shake our heads. There is so much to do until we think we are not what we are. Victoria's. I see those letters written on envelopes I know are for me because of the shape of that word, that greedy V. Its two arms open wide, ready to accept anything.
That was a wonderful reading.
Thank you.
I think it's really interesting coming straight after the Plath poem as well, because of thinking about how difficult it was for Plath to be a female poet, and her ideas about identity and being a mother and a housewife and various things like that. Has her life, do you think it's impacted on you, on your poetry, and the way you think? You want to say a little bit about that?
Every single part of her life is impacted, I think, on my poetry from when I was, when I was a teenager, when I first discovered her. And reading her poems was like a slap in the face in the best way. Like it totally woke me up and allowed me to see what was possible, that you could actually go to the heart of things. And I was just in awe of her bravery and her anger and rage and the depth of her. And then as I suppose as I got to know more and more about her life, that she was trying so hard to be so many things at the same time, and in a society, as you say, that made it impossible. And I recently read Red Comet, and if you haven't read that book, I massively recommend it. It's an extraordinary biography of her, and it just struck me anew, as you say, how she was trying to build a life out of excelling in every area, because she was a perfectionist and because she was so ambitious. And there was no way for her to facilitate that fire and that hunger. That, I don't know, maybe she could have become a nun in a previous life, maybe, or a religious figure. And obviously she was the best, tried to be the best mother and the best daughter and the best wife and the best poet and so on. So I think I have huge compassion for her. And I think in a way that allows me to have compassion for myself in my fumblings around trying to be an adult, and that I don't have to be brilliant at everything, or even okay at everything, or even, passing at everything. And I think she's, my spirit poet.
Yeah, I think your book deals a lot with shame and ideas around identity and everything. And I think it's an incredibly empowering book. And I think it's going to be empowering for other women, younger women. But you've mentioned saints, and I'm looking at the time, and I'm going to ask you to read, first of all, 2 poems, and then we'll talk about it afterwards, because I can keep an eye on the time better. So it's Hunger Strikes Catherine of Siena, followed by Hunger Strikes Columba, and then we'll talk a little bit about the saints, because you did mention nuns. It was the only career aside of the usual one for women.
Hunger Strikes Catherine of Siena, 1347 to 1380. My sister taught me how. O Bonaventura, they wanted me to marry him, the slack-jawed widower. I vomited twigs, hid in the convent, wore a widow's habit. The other nuns complained until at 21 I met him. He presented me with a ring fashioned from his skin, told me the sliver of flesh bound us. Wait, he told me, promising it would be special. I levitated, only ate his body. Others did not understand how good it was to kiss his holy prepuce. O Bonaventura, I am a house of sticks. My bones rattle with desire until I lick it. I feel it quiver, alive on my tongue. Hunger strikes Columba of Haiti, 1467 to 1501. My body is a temple I keep clean for you, spotless, lashing my skin so it grows tired of bleeding. Wearing hair shirts, I cannot forget what it means to be alert. I have toured the Holy Land in visions. I don't imagine they would understand what I see. When they came for me, the men, they ripped off my robes, expecting to find me virginal, untouched. How they gasped in horror. How glad I was that I had used myself like an old rag. Beating myself with that spiked chain shielded me. My breasts and hips so deformed, they ran from me, screaming.
I just love how glad I was that I used myself like an old rag. I was interested also about it opens with my sister taught me how, and I love this sense of, this is, I mean, there's so much many connections in this book that I can't make them all in this hour, but what I really love through this is the sense of sisterhood that's going through the book, because there's lots of wonderful poems about your sisters. And then because I love the when you address O Bonaventura, and I feel it feels so real and conversational, because I think you're kind of imagining telling one of your sisters. And of course, we have all these nuns, which are sisters. And then I think you're writing this for the sisters as well, the sisters.
All of the sisters, yeah.
And I think that's kind of, so how did you get into the sisters, these particular ones? And how
I suppose initially it started with choosing my confirmation name, and I had two very lovely aunts who were nuns, both who sadly passed away. They would love to have been here, I know. They would give me books about various saints and so on, about choosing my name and what would be appropriate, because obviously I'm Victoria, which is a Roman century or a Roman martyr, so not the other person. So I became interested in the names of saints and the lives of saints, and obviously they were very sanitized. So when I was writing the book, they kind of came back to me, and I suppose that notion of the alternative for women who didn't want to be at the mercy of their biology, or didn't want to procreate, or didn't want to have that life, that it was often the only alternative. And what struck me, I suppose, was this intensity and these particular saints that are remembered and are sainted because of their extreme behaviors. And so Bonaventura, for example, Catherine's older sister, she died in childbirth, and Catherine was going to marry, because her parents wanted her to, the widower. But her sister Bonaventura had already shown her how to get what you want. And Bonaventura, to resist her husband apparently wasn't very nice to her initially. She would just starve herself until he was decent. And so her sister learned that behavior and realized in order to control her narrative and in order to assert her agency, she had to do something as extreme as that and as shocking as that. And she did. And, you know, to the point where she started having visions. And Columba is the same and comes from the same part of Italy and would have been very influenced by Catherine and was a stigmatist as well. Both of them were stigmatists. And again, would have had these visions around the age of 6 or 7, again, which seems like such a formative age. And, you know, then decided to dedicate herself to God, persuaded her parents to agree to it through extreme measures of starving themselves. It was called Anorexia mirabilis at the time. And so I began researching all about that and looking at a book Rudolph Bell's book called Holy Anorexia, which was published in 1985, and a brilliant article as well by Hilary Mantel, outlining, I suppose, the connection between eating disorders now and how we view them as being, some people view them as being a vanity project. And how, in fact, when we look back at time and look at these young women and how they used eating disorders and how they control their bodies, it was for a very different purpose, or was it, I suppose, is the question.
I think it's very interesting, and especially because they're from a different time and they look at things differently to how we look at the body and things like that. So for me, I feel this is a project you're going to be returning to again and again, because I think I definitely think of you as an excavator, and your kind of little couplets are like steps going down the stairs as you go down. I can imagine you're going to, this is just layers that you're going to be producing. I did mean to say, but I think we need to probably stop for questions very soon. So I'm going to end with one more poem about self-denial, a different kind of self-denial. But I did, as you were reading it, and it does remind me of going right back to the famine poem, does remind me, the first few lines remind me of the poems from Ariel, the picture of the baby's head as a moon. It's so beautiful. You managed to make the horrific beautiful. I don't know how you do it. So I think we're going to end with family planning, which is self-explanatory. And I was going to say a very Catholic thing, but I think that's wrong. So I didn't say that. Read family planning.
I'm going to dedicate this to my incredibly patient and wonderful husband, David, who is just the most patient man in the world, and I love him very much. Family planning. You were tugging at my skirt, aged 2, wanting a toy, a spoon from the drawer. You are a few months old, just able to hold your big old baby head up on that teensy neck. It is your birthday. I am sweating and empty. You were greasy white with vernix rising and falling with my breath. I survived, and you did too. Your father is crying. We are a little family, neat as a pin, except you are still waiting, Portia or Lucia or May in parts. I carry a tiny piece I secrete so secretly every month. You grow impatient when water turns that warm and brilliant shade. It is alive while you are not. Daughter to be, if you could form your hands into little fists, you would bang on my womb, that carpet-lined waiting room, but your father has your fingers, and I have wrapped your nails up so you can't rip me to ribbons. We keep you apart, even as we come together. But I hear him whisper your name, soft as blame in his sleep.
Gorgeous. And I definitely think we've got leaving cert biology to thank again.
Sorry, Martina. It's just so strange reading that now, because I didn't know, but I must have known that she would arrive, and she did. Vivian, who's 4 now since last week, and it's like I've almost described her exactly. It's so strange reading it now, in retrospect, that she was coming, whether I had intended it or not. She was on the way. So it's lovely to kind of see how the poems reflect different parts of my life as well, I suppose, and how I've changed so much.
So it's kind of prophetic as well, isn't it? Because when I first read it, I knew you had a little girl, so I was imagining her, and then I got the shock of that she wasn't. There was an imaginary child. So it's 10 to 8, and we've got some questions, and somebody wants to translate you into Portuguese, so I thought I should.
That is so amazing, because I have every poetry event that or workshop that I've gone to in the UK, I have met an American participant, and they look at me and they say, "Are you Portuguese?" And I say, "Well, there's a story that the Kenneficks, a pirate called Kennefick washed up on the shore in Youghal and went around populating East Cork. So I was like, sure, I'm Portuguese. So yes, translate away. I'd love that.
So she's going to contact John. I've just seen, I'm just trying to get back into Q&A. Open, right. So do you have a favorite poem or sequence of poems from the collection? Michael Dooley would like to know.
I think probably, that's a really good question, Michael. I think probably my favorite sequence is the second family sequence, because that was the hardest to write and the one, I suppose, that excavated things the most. And I can't believe that I wrote it, I suppose, in a way. But I really love Cork Schoolgirl. I think that's the one that, of all of them, that I feel the warm fuzzies about, because it was the gateway, as I said earlier, to so much of the rest of the collection. It was really, it really facilitated so much once I had written it out. So I think that's probably my favorite for now. I think they'll probably change.
Well, there's a question from Roisin Kelly on that, and she wants to know if she'd like to know more about your approach to placing her in the context of 1916 with relation to gender, seeing as women have been very erased from the struggle for independence in Irish history as a whole.
I think I had to go back to being a teenager in order to do that, because I think that was when I first realized, that it's his story and not her story, which I always tell my students, and they always groan, because I'm like, it should be our story, not his story. So I think I very consciously was aware that it had to be a young girl for me in order to do that, because I think no one has more audacity and fire and feist and sense of injustice than a teenage girl in an Irish Catholic single-sex school. Like, they are just so passionate, in my experience, that's what I experienced, and so resolved and, strong and sure of themselves. And it's like, I suppose there are many downsides to single-sex schools, of course, but there is this sense of, like a convent, that, some people obviously went on further to do that. There's this sense of community, and I think using this, the young girl allowed me to be bolder, I think, in accessing that space and taking that space. And I think that using that notion of kissing and consuming, I felt like I tried to approach it maybe with a little bit more gentility, but I had to like.
There's another question from Aoife Lyle, and I think this is kind of it's part of what you're saying now. So I'm going to ask the question: do you feel the visceral nature of your work is a reaction to being reared in a world that wanted you? I really like this, what she's asked, that wanted you to forget and defend your body at the same time.
Aoife, what a brilliant question. It's so lovely you're here. So lovely you're all here. It's just really, I wish I could see you and your beautiful faces. I think so. I think that's exactly it. And it does relate back to what I was saying just now, that I felt I had to go big, I suppose. And that in order to overwhelm the, white male wall that was in front of me, I had to walk right up to it and, stick my tongue out. Yeah, stick my finger in and, get all up in its business. I think that was the only way that I could approach it. And I think it took me a while to get there. But as you say, Martina, it's amazing. Like, I think there's so much more, and it is an excavation project, and I there are darker places to go, and what I'm working on now is even even further down the line. So I think it does open up a way to talk about women's experiences, and I think it's in such a tradition, of Sylvia Plath and Lucy L. Clifton and so many other, yourself, and so many other women who write so beautifully that I've learned so much from as well.
I'm God, there's so many good questions. You're getting really good questions.
That's great. Oh my gosh. Thank
It's a
you.
little time. Did having your daughter change your outlook on writing or spark a change?
Yes, absolutely, definitely, 100% on everything that I had ever thought. And in a sense, I see this book, this book as being, you know, I know people have problems sometimes, you know, talking about books as children, but for me, the process, you know, was similar in terms of what a massive change it is in your life to create something that's independent of you. And I feel this book is such an innocent book now compared to what I know about my body and compared to what I know my body can do, and the depth of the relationship I have with my daughter that goes so deep. And now the appreciation I have as well, I suppose, for my relationship with my mother as her daughter and her as a daughter of her mother, and suddenly aware of this lineage of daughters and mothers that I think I was having, you know, I was aware of, but I didn't feel. And I think having her in my life, which is the greatest joy, has really lightened. I suppose I'm lighter in one sense, but also in the poems that I'm writing now, there's even more of an engagement with the body. I'm not as, I think I've let go of a lot of shame. And you do, I think, when you have a home birth, there's no shame. So I think the poems, you know, it started off with this book, and I suppose then with my daughter, and hopefully that will continue in my next work. Touch wood.
No, I imagine, I really think, you know, I see so many layers coming out of this, so many more books. Somebody else wanted to know, did it take long to write? I should say the name. Sarah Corbett would like to know if the book feels like a sustained project. Did it take a long time to write?
Yes. Hi, Sarah. It's so lovely that you're here. It did take an awfully long time to write. And I suppose I wrote that first, you know, the Cork Schoolgirl poem, you know, it was 2015. And there's some of the poems in the book, like Swing, that are older than that. But a lot of them, it came much, much later, and it was slow. And, you know, I'd write an awful lot, and it took an awful long time to consolidate that and edit it down and let go of a lot of poems that, you know, didn't need to be in here. So it was a very sustained project, and such, like, I must admit, you know, I'm a very confused person by the world. I'm constantly confused by the world since I was born. I was like, what is this place? And why is it not a different way? And I think it takes me a long time, or it took me a long time to find my place in it for myself, and to stand there and look at things from where I am and speak them plain. And so that took me a long time, because I had to work through all of the things I talk about in the book, I suppose, all of those issues around the body and Catholicism and consumption and capitalism and misogyny and all of those things. So yeah, it was a long time coming.
Somebody else, I'm not sure when they're going to kick us out, but I can see we're gone past 8, but talking about the order of the poems, did that take long? That
was the work of John and Colette and Rebecca, who helped me. That is my nightmare, is putting things in order. I find it overwhelming, because I love working on the poems individually and maybe in 2s or 3s, but looking at them across a bigger project, I find really overwhelming. I find it very difficult to see the shape of them. I was putting them chronologically and so on, and I was very lucky. I had a mentorship with Rebecca Goss, and she helped me so much in kind of letting go of a lot of poems and putting a little bit of order on it. And then Colette Bryce also helped me with the mentorship. Extremely lucky again. They're both wonderful editors and amazing poets. And she was the one who suggested that the sequence be broken up with the saints, because I had it all together and it was so intense. Like, even on the page, it was just pulsating. And I just found it very difficult to look at, and I felt it was too much. And so once that was broken up, the whole book just opened up. And then John like absolutely polished so much of the order as well. So it did take a while, and you know, it took a village as well. So I was very grateful for all of their amazing advice and assistance, and to know them, they're wonderful people. I love them.
Well, I agree completely as another Carcanet poet. I think they're pretty wonderful, and I think I'm just looking at the time, because as I was, were we going to be kicked out or not? But it's 3 minutes past 8. But I think they've done a fantastic job with this book. It's really wonderful. It looks and it sounds fantastic. So I've been so happy to have a little bit of time with it this evening.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Martina. It was just wonderful. And I was really honored that you agreed to do it, and you did it so beautifully. And again, thank you for all of your advice and help and hand-holding over the last couple of weeks, because bringing a book out in a pandemic is an extreme sport. So I'm really grateful for all of your love, really grateful.
Thank you,
John.
Victoria, and thank you so much, Martina. What a really wonderful night's conversation. And I love the idea that you think breaking up that sequence makes it less intense.
It's a breeze now, it's fine.
Well, the book is, I think the link has just been popped into the chat again for those of you who'd like to catch up and read the rest of the book. There's so much here that we didn't hear as well tonight, because it really is a big, sustained book with so many interesting parts to it. Thank you, Martina, and thanks, Victoria. I also have to tell you that Martina is going to be launching her new book, American Mules, which is coming out in 3 weeks' time. So we're going to be back in this same set of Zoom rooms, and we'll be here with Tom McCarthy in 3 weeks' time. So you can go onto the Carcanet website and you can book in your ticket for that as well. I know it's going to be another wonderful night. Thanks again. I think we're going to turn off the cameras now, but we will leave the chat open for a couple of minutes if you'd like to drop any further comments in. Thanks again.